Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Faculty of Law, University Malaya. Our webinar today is Doing Business in the United States, a panel discussion on US import bans on Malaysian palm oil and rubber gloves. We will be discussing policy perspectives. Today is Friday, the 25th of February, and our webinar will be from 9 a.m. to about 10:30 a.m. Before we begin, allow me to set some ground rules. Kindly remain muted for the duration of the presentation. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the session after all the speakers have delivered their speeches. If you have any questions at any time, you are welcome to type them into the chat box and they will be picked up during the Q&A and addressed to the speakers. And so we begin with a very good morning. Yang Bahagia Dato' Associate Professor Dr. Johan Shamsuddin Haji Sabaruddin, Dean of the Faculty of Law, University Malaya. Dr. Alima Jonet, Adjunct Professor and Prime Mover of this series of lectures and webinars on doing business with the United States. Esteemed panel members, respected participants, ladies and gentlemen. UMCoRS, the University of Malaya Center of Regulatory Studies, and the Faculty of Law, University Malaya, extend our warm welcome and thanks to all of you for joining us in this webinar. To begin our webinar, we invite Yang Bahagia Dato' Associate Professor Dr. Johan Shamsuddin Haji Sabaruddin, Dean of the Faculty, to give an opening address. Dr. Dean.
Thank you, Raymond. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi and good morning. Salam sejahtera. Yang berusaha Dr. Alima Junit, and berusaha Profesor Dr. Ahmad Ibrahim, Mr. Muhammad Fairuz, Muhammad Hizir, Ms. Surina Ali, Mr. Faisal Arif, and Ms. Renuka Balasubramaniam. Participants, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this panel discussion. The title of our panel, as you've heard, is Doing Business with the United States, a panel discussion on US import bans on Malaysian palm oil and rubber gloves, policy perspectives. It is organized by University of Malaya's Faculty of Law through its University of Malaya Center of Regulatory Studies, or UMCoRS, in conjunction with the Faculty of Law's Golden Jubilee celebrations this year. The panel is a response to the import sanctions imposed by the US Customs and Border Protection on several Malaysian companies for allegedly using forced labor in their productions. These import sanctions are technically called Withholding Release Orders, or the WROs. I was made to understand that today's panel discussion is a follow-up of an earlier webinar held on the 30th of April 2021, also organized by UMCoRS. That panel focused on the political and trade aspects of the WROs. As the companies sanctioned worked hard to revoke the WROs, this morning's panel's objectives are: number one, to deepen our appreciation of the harm that these sanctions have caused to the industries; two, to review the current measures to address forced labor concerns; three, to discuss the current policy relating to migrant workers and reform proposals; four, to identify some of the gaps in the current efforts to address forced labor incidents; and five, to provide updates on the efforts to modernize the Malaysian palm oil industry via the use of artificial intelligence. I also expect my fellow academics on the panel to call for more industry academic collaborations to modernize our industries. Indeed, the Faculty of Law welcomes more partnerships with the private sector to modernize our industries. We have experts in various legal fields for consultation. In addition, UMCoRS also offers trainings on regulatory matters. In short, as Malaysia's premier law faculty, there are many ways the Faculty of Law can support our government and industries as they face the challenges of globalization. Ladies and gentlemen, as with the 2021 panel, I am confident that this panel will be a valuable forum for sharing ideas and exchanging views among the panelists, as well as between the panel and participants. Indeed, in order for our industries to meet global challenges, everyone and every institution has to come forward to contribute. Our panel this morning comprises not only the members of the academia, but also representatives of the government and independent human rights researchers. I'm confident that the policy discussions by the panelists and the participants will contribute to the short, medium, and long-term solutions to the challenges we are facing. Last but not least, I would like to thank panelists and the participants for joining us in this discussion. I sincerely hope all of you will find the discussion beneficial. I wish you a very productive discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yang Bahagia Dato' Associate Professor Dr. Johan Shamsuddin, for the welcoming speech. Before we proceed to the panel discussion, please be reminded that we would like you to remain muted throughout the session. If you have questions at any time, please type them into the Q&A box and they will be picked up at the end of the session during the Q&A. And now I hand over the webinar to our moderator for the session, Dr. Alimah Jonet, Adjunct Professor of the Faculty of Law, University of Malaya, and counsel with Messrs. Medal San Filippo in Washington, DC. Dr. Alimah, please proceed.
Thank you, Rahman. Yang berbahagia Datuk Din, Dr. Johan, honor us with his presence this morning, and my esteemed panelists and the participants. And I wish you good morning, those in Malaysia, and good night, good evening to Fairuz here in Washington and myself. I welcome you to this morning session. This is a second part of the session that we began last year. The session that was compiled by the development where several Malaysian companies were sanctioned by the US Custom and Border Protection for allegedly using forced labor in the production of their product. So this morning session, we will be dealing with policy relating to the root cause of this problem. For that reason, we have assembled two scientists, three lawyers who will discuss the various aspects of the policy relating to that cause the forced labor. So my panel will begin with Encik Fairuz. Then we'll follow by Puan Surina, and then there will be Encik Faisal, followed by Puan Ranuka, and last is Professor Dr. Ahmad Ibrahim, who is a scientist, who will enlighten us about our effort to mechanization our palm oil industry and rubber gloves. So I would like first to invite Encik Farus, who is Regional Manager for the Americas, based in Washington, D.C. of Malaysian Palm Oil Board. Encik Farus has been in Washington since 2017, and his role is basically to deal with all aspects of Malaysian palm oil. He interfaces with U.S. government agencies, the DOL, Department of Labor, and U.S. Customs and Border Protections. And he will be sharing with us to appreciate how the harm that the WROs, withholding have been imposed on companies, and he'll be sharing with us the problem caused to the US buyers, as well as to share with us his interaction with the government agencies relevant to this issue. With that, before that, his bio is in the brochure, and Encik Farus is a scientist and a graduate of University Putra. I hand it over to you, Farus.
Thank you, Dr. Alima, for the kind introductions. And then very good morning, Datuk Din, esteemed panelists, and the participant of this webinar. So actually, this is my pleasure to be with you this morning to share information and relevant updates related to the forced labor issues, in particularly from the perspective of Americas or US. Especially this issue being, major issues for the palm oil industries, for the rubber glove. I think as most of us is aware, I think all of you is aware of this newspaper news being reported, including in Malaysia. Numbers of Malaysian companies had been banned or getting the WRO for the product, for their product, been denied or been avoided to enter the US, provided unless they able to provide the product are not produced or related to the forced labor. So anyway, I think I don't want to give much explanation of this. I think this is the reason why all of us here for this topic. But anyway, to start with, issues, actually it's not something quite new to the laws. Actually, the law, the section 307, in which usually referred in the discussion or in the mentioned in the newspaper, it has been part of the Trade Act of 1930. So the law itself, or the US law already prohibited the import of products or goods, whether produced or manufactured whole or in part with the convicts, forced or indentured labor. So it is not something new as far as the law is considered. However, since 1930 to 2016, actually, the enforcement of the section 307 are quite rare. Actually, there is a loophole in that regulation at the time, in which if the products, even though being subject or somehow related to the forced labor, but if the product are not produced in the state, in the United States, or the supply is the less, so this product are still could be exported or could be imported by the American. However, this situation has been changed in 2016, in which the President Obama basically make a new regulation under the Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act of 2015, in which regardless whatever the supply of the said material, if the product being produced with the forced labor, it's not supposed to enter the US market. Actually, at that time, the amendment was motivated by significant attention to the import on sales of the product related to forced labor, particularly the issue of seafood, cocoa, and cotton at that time. But it is, about 5 or 7 years ago. So the palm oil was not, really a focus. But I think all of us is aware the enforcement of that regulation has been increased over the year. So you can see the changes. Actually, from year 2000 until 2015, there is no such enforcement of that 307 section. However, just immediately after the Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act being signed by President Obama, so you could see the enforcement of 307 had been actively pursued by the Custom and Border Protection of the United States. And then, as you can see, the highest was considered, the highest now is considered in the year 2020. So at that time also, Malaysian company actually first started being issued WRO was 2019. It is a rubber glove from the WRP Asia. But I think the focus among the Malaysian industries was in the year 2020. It happened that our major exporter of the palm oil from Malaysia, two of them, FGV and Samdabi, was issued with the WRO in that year. So for the detail of the CBP enforcement of the WRO, I suggested you to go to their website. They also provided quarterly. They will provide the statistic how many WRO or worker shipment be detained related to the WRO. So to set this issue of forced labor, it's not only specifically for Malaysia. Even though recently it is a very, become a focus of the Malaysian industries, but it also happening to many other countries. So included, some of them could be quite developed countries such as Japan. We also have some, of course, the neighbor of the United States, Mexico as well. However, the enforcement of this WRO, so what I would like to share here, because I got many feedback from the companies, from the stakeholder in Malaysia particularly. So there is a lot of information which is considered not clear by them. So how when the company has been issued a WRO or petition, what happened to that? What's supposed to be provided to the CBP and so on. So for ladies and gentlemen, for your kind information, actually the forced labor division of the CBP had been set up in the year 2018. So relatively, these divisions are quite new. So in fact, had been reported in the numbers of papers, included the Congress research report or even the Government Accountability Office report. So in which the CBP said the forced labor division are quite short-handed. In fact, they have limited staff and so on. So in fact, it was being reported there is a delay due to the many of this reason, limited resources at that time. So if you could, even one of the main issue have been reported from the stakeholder, actually the clarity, the transparency of this enforcement of 307 by the CBP. So we also convey the concern of the Malaysian industries to when I have meeting with the CBP, with the other government, US government agency on this issue. So I think it's also been getting the attention of the numbers of report of the US state government office the issue of the because numbers of the what call it, when the company been issued a petition, they're not sure whether how long it will take for them to get it any feedback or whatever the status of their petition. So there is what we call it, not a clear timeline being provided on this issue. So in fact, there is a suggestion by the report task force, first level enforcement task force, in which they instructed or they suggest to come out clear or what we call it, more transparent in this enforcement. So I think what I would like to share here, ladies and gentlemen. So this is a new document set up. Actually, this is a publication belong to the CBP, in which I take it exactly 100%. So I don't want to add any what I call it, any. In fact, this is you could find in their website as well. So how they enforce the section 307, what mean by the WRO, and then if your product been issued a finding, for example, in the case of, for example, like Sadabi, what happened to that product? So it is very clear. I mentioned what call it, with you issue been issued WRO, the product can be exported within 3 months. But if you already issued the finding, for example, even the product then be shipped to the US won't be able to be re-exported. It has to be somehow, it'll be destroyed unless you're able to provide any document to prove that this product are not related to the forced labor. So this is the timeline. I think in general, if any, basically what happened, the first step triggering any enforcement of this 307 actually is a report, a petition or report by any entities, including a person, to the CBP. If there's any petition that provided the document or any evidence to the CBP basically will evaluate the information, and then at the same time will conduct any review or whatever clarification required, included from the party that were affected. So I think usually it will take about at least 6 months to determine whether this product, even the CBP to come out whether to their finding whether this product are related to forced labor or not. So at least any petition within a year, they should be able to find out whether this product being I mentioned earlier. So anyway, this is the process that I mentioned. I hope the industry member in Malaysia have been guided with this. So what happened if you having the WRO? So what you should do? So this is also, I think, I would like to share. This is a bit more clear, the condition for the companies that affected by this issue. So what I would like to share with the industry in Malaysia. So basically, it is about the credible third parties audit or verification, because most of the companies sometimes they appointed the the auditor, which is seem not be like a third party by the Americans, So sometimes we come out with our own internal audit to prove that we are not having such forced labor issue, in which they are not say this kind of report is rejected, but it carry less credible, So this is at least the way that this is for our industries in Malaysia to really look into this aspect, in which if we have anything, whether the improvement, it has to be verified by the third parties, possibly the same parties that doing your audit for these issues. So this is the current, I think, status also been available in their website, the CBP. We have 6 active WRO been issued to the Malaysian companies. So some of the feedback that I get it from the companies that been having this issue, they ask me how for example WRP or even Top Glove can resolve their problem with the CBP. So it's totally depend from case to case, because during my meeting with the CBP as well, they acknowledge that, for example, for the palm, it is more complex supply chain rather than on-site issues like the rubber glove. Is a rubber glove usually is only a site. So if you can improve your plant, for example, where your accommodation of your workers to that site, it is easily or much easier to be resolved rather than the supply chain of oil palm, because it has to be start from the plantation up to the our refinery. And then I think I also share numbers of the improvement that been happen in Malaysia to the respective, including the Institute of Bureau of International Labor Affairs, or ILAB, of the US Department of Labor. So numbers of these, because probably most of you are aware, the ILAB also produce or publish their publication that listed industries or countries having this forced labor issue, because usually the CBP also refer to this such a report to just to get the idea whether the country or the industry that they suspected having the forced labor been reported in this ILAB report, which been produced every 2 years now. So the next report we expected to be published this year. So this is the report that I mentioned, but for the benefit of all of us, probably we're talking about rubber glove and palm oil, but there is another two sector. In fact, the electronic and government are much earlier been reported having the forced labor issue. So I hope when we're talking about forced labor, it just not narrow down to these two issues, but we have to consider this issue also affecting our countries in general, particularly the sector been mentioned in the report. So whatever they probably to the many parties. So please, this issue can be resolved not by only two sectors. We have to come up with our so-called consolidated effort, not individual industries to work on these issues only. So if you're looking for the development in the United States, actually there is numbers of proposed new legislation. In fact, recently the senator also suggested the legislation of the what we call it slave-free business certification act, in which the company, the CEO, has to provide some sort of document to prove that they are getting supply free from the product then produced by the forced labor. So it's just to show you how this issue getting prominent actually among, in fact, the United Trade Office also develop the strategy in the to combat the forced labor through their policy as well. So in fact, I think most of you are aware. In fact, now the President Biden also proclaimed that every January become like a human trafficking prevention month. So this is very serious as far as the industries in the US is concerned. So as a result of this, so for example, when I discuss with the industries here, they are very concerned because for the case of the oil palm, for example, palm product, so they mentioned it shouldn't be like a countrywide issues, because they still, as you know, two biggest producer or exporter of palm product is Malaysia, Indonesia. As far as when I communicate with them, they don't want to depend only one supply of product from Indonesia. They still want to import from Malaysia, for example, as far as the business is concerned. So we continue to work with the industries in the US. In fact, numbers of associations, including the Institute of Shortening and Edible Oil, they have been in discussion with us. So even to how to facilitate or to cooperate with the Malaysian palm industry to resolve this issue. So I think, in fact, at the recent webinar conducted by the CBP, they also encourage the Malaysian industry to work with the CBP in this issue. So I think this is the way forward on this subject. We need to work we need to explain what is our limitation, for example, if any, and then I remind the CBP it has to be more. We have to consider the realistic approach in this, issue rather than some of the, for example, the issue it cannot be solved overnight. For example, in looking at the complex industry of palm oil. So as far as the Malaysian palm oil industry or myself, I'm more than happy to provide any updates to the stakeholder in Malaysia, because it is my duty as the ear and eyes of the palm oil industry to update all of you any development related to this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Fairuz, for your presentation. Just to underscore how important for Malaysian industry, as well as work with the public sector to address these forced labor concerns. As you mentioned, palm oil and rubber gloves are not the only industries has been linked with forced the government industry, electronic too. So these require everyone to work together to address this. And with that, thank you again for your presentation. I would like to invite Puan Surina Ali to briefly explain to us efforts that have been made since our panel discussion last year, at least, and efforts on the part of the government, the private sector, and other stakeholders in addressing this concern. Puan Surina, before that, is an independent researcher and also spent time as with WROs as a consultant, and she has done a lot of training on forced labor, and she is a graduate of University Islam and has spent 20 years working combination with the government, the international organization, and doing training and also execute projects. And she does a lot of forced labor training. The floor is yours, Puan Surina.
Thank you, Alima, and thank you, UM, for inviting me to do some sharing with regards to the policy changes that has taken place. So with this, Raymond, can we go to the first slide of, yeah. So I'll be, second slide, please. Yes. So today I will outline, having heard what Fairuz shared with us on the US front, I think it's timely for us to understand what has happened with regards to the various players at the national level. So today my presentation will entail the latest updates on the US CBP WRO, just a brief one. And then we shall focus on the imposition of WRO on the palm sector, and subsequently moving on to the rubber glove sector. And finally, we shall see what are the national initiatives that has been accumulating post the US CBP. Next slide, please. Okay, I think this one, Fairuz has already mentioned. As we know, there are currently 8 companies, Malaysian companies, being imposed with this trade sanction. 2 are from the palm sector, namely FGV, sometime 2020, and then followed by Sime Dabi, and the rest of the companies are from the rubber gloves manufacturing sector. So this is the latest update that we have seen from the previous presentation as well. Next, please. Yes, and we need to understand what are the allegations made against our businesses. Basically, the 11 ILO forced labor indicator are all the allegation made against the companies. And I would like to share some of the common allegations made would be on debt bondage, retention of IDs, with excessive overtime, as well as abusive working and living conditions. This is a general phenomena across both sectors. Next, please. Okay, having understood the allegation made against the company, let us move on to look at who are the companies involved in the palm sector, what are the allegations made against them, and what is the status of the subject matter at the moment. So let's look at FGV. FGV is the first palm company that was imposed with the US CBP trade sanction on the 1st of October 2020. The allegation made is against the 11 ILO indicator, including child labor. And the status of the subject matter is that FGV has joined the FLA and they are carrying out audit at the moment. As we have seen in the previous presentation, what are the steps that businesses should take to clear their name when they are implicated in the US CBP WRO. The second palm company that was implicated is, go back please, Sime Plantation. And the date of the WRO was on 31st December 2020. So you can see 2020 is a really hot year for the palm sector. Yeah, and again, 11 ILO forced labor indicator, and status is ongoing independent verification process, which means it's the independent audit that is ongoing. Nonetheless, on the 28th of January, the finding has been confirmed by the CBP. So the implication of that finding would be on the seizure of all the goods from SDP as well as its subsidiary and any JV entity. So all the goods are being seized at the port of entry then, like what Idea has explained earlier. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. And then with regards to Sime Darby, as you can see, early February, there was an announcement to the effect that they have made a commitment of 82 million to reimburse all their foreign worker, and this will be made in a single lump sum payment to all of them. And interestingly, they have a sinking fund for this. Then let's move on to the next slide. In short, at the end of the year, I found this report by the Center of Sustainable Palm Oil. Basically, two very critical points to highlight with all of you is that the palm sector is really facing labor shortage due to the pandemic. And the second point of importance would be on the increased recruitment fees. As Julian McGill, head of the Southeast Asia at LMC International, said, soon there will be no more cheap labor for the palm sector. Yeah. So let's move on to the next slide. So this one I will be talking a little bit on the rubber glove manufacturing sector. Let's move on to the next slide, Raymond. I would like to share a snapshot because I think that the rubber glove industry is far more interesting in that you can see that they have worked on the repayment of recruitment fees. And from this table, you can see that the trends within the business sector within the rubber glove, two types. One are the more proactive, like since 2021, Hartalega and Kosan, without the imposition of the trade sanction, they have embarked on paying off recruitment fees to their foreign workers, leaving the other three companies to be imposed with the sanction in order to take action. So you can see a different trend. This is just to highlight, the snapshot is to highlight the differences in their business practices. Thank you. Next, please. Okay, I think we know that the champion for the rubber glove sector would be Top Glove because they would the company was imposed with the WRO in July 2020 based on reasonable information, and then the confirmation of the complaint was made on in March 2021. Nonetheless, TG was very take a very proactive role, and by September 2022, the WRO was lifted and they are back to business. Nonetheless, is subject to a few undertakings that we have seen in the earlier presentation. For instance, the remediation framework, the continuous improvement framework, which I will highlight later on. And if you look at the news on the 28th Jan, USCBP commended TG for their proactive engagement with USCBP, and then they undertake audit by a third independent party, making commitments for their remediation framework, and also a strong commitment on reform. So we can learn from our fellow business colleague from TG as to how to handle the USCBP WRO. Then let's move on to the second company. Supermax is another, to my mind, a big boy that has been imposed with the USCBP sometime in October 2021. So 2020 was the palm oil sector. 2021, the focus was made for the rubber glove manufacturer. And as you can see, when the WRO being imposed, they impose on the group of companies. So in the case of Supermax, would be Supermax and the subsidiaries like Maxter Gloves, Maxter Glove Manufacturing, and Supermax Glove Manufacturing. And CBP has identified 10 out of the 11 ILO indicators. And let's move on to the other slide, because this is still ongoing. The other two companies that I wish to share with all of you will be on Smart Gloves, November 4th, 2020. And again, the group of companies have been implicated. Nonetheless, the degree of the allegation is slightly lower in this case. The allegation is 7 out of the 11 ILO indicators. But at this juncture, I couldn't find what are the specific indicators. So this would sort of go in line with what this newspaper report talks about. USCBP did not provide the basis for the detention order. This was how it came out in the newspaper. Okay, let's move on. So this is still another ongoing negotiation. And the latest one is YTY, is also a rubber manufacturing company sometime in January 28, 2022, whereby again, 7 out of the 11 ILO indicator, but this time around, where I got the information, they are on deception, abuse of vulnerability, retention of IDs, intimidation, threats, debt bondage, abusive working and living conditions, and excessive overtime as well. The interesting case about this company is that sometime in 2021, it has been awarded as a supplier of the year. So you never know your nasib lah, the Malaysia, you never know your what would happen to your company, because by the turn of the new year, this company has been slapped with the USCBP WRO. So I guess moving forward, good labor practices should be something that company should embrace and embark on. Then thank you. Let's move on to the next one. Yep, so that would be a closure to the sharing on the rubber glove manufacturing sectors. I only managed to highlight 4 companies. As you know, there are 6 companies. And with this, I would like to take all of you to my last point of discussion to discuss a little bit about what are the national initiatives that has been taken by various stakeholders in the context of Malaysia. So in my analysis, I would think these are all silo initiatives that maybe at the closure, I will say something as to how do we move forward then. So the government of Malaysia has announced its national action plan. I think sometime in November before the end of the year on forced labor. After collaborating with many agencies like UNDP, as well as carrying out consultation with NGOs and the business community. And the other active entity is Suhakam. They have been working very hard since in 2018 or 2019 when I first came into this field of work. I've been engaging with them and saw all the efforts they have put in on this to address. So they built the foundation for the action plan for today. And then I would like to also share what are the initiatives that by the business sector, primarily from the Malaysian Palm Oil Association, and then from the key players from the palm sector as well as the rubber glove sectors. And then finally, we look at the multi-stakeholder collaboration as well as the efforts by the CSO. Can we move on to the other slide then? So basically, I have shortlisted these are a few initiatives. Like what I said, the highlight would be the National Action Plan on Forced Labor, because it is an action plan that the government has embarked on, and hopefully with the participation of everybody, all the relevant stakeholders within the national context, to make this a success. Yeah, because silo initiatives cannot be a long-term initiatives. And then we also witnessed some bilateral MOU, and then at the MPIC, the Ministry on Commodities, there has been a new strategy in the palm sector that was announced by the minister on the 13th of Jan 2022. And other small initiatives, the Foreign Affairs actually plays a very important role in the negotiation or of the process, but we didn't have any rep today. But what I saw on their website is they have talked about a foreign policy framework that that we should be revitalizing our economy, gearing for the SDG goals, yeah, and also upholding multilateralism. And we want to be part of a global player. So these are how do you strategize and position yourself if you have these types of aspiration and objectives. At the Ministry of Trade, I saw that in order to tackle some of the pandemic challenges, the ministry has put in place a safe at work. So these are to encourage the manufacturing and related services sector to embark, going back to work, and however adhering to certain SOP. And this embarking on this program will make you eligible to certain tax incentives. Yeah, so these are the practices that the government has embarked on. Yeah, to encourage good practices as well. Let's move on to the other slide. Okay, with regards to the palm sector, I think at the sector level, we saw that MPOA made an announcement on Responsible Employment Charter on the 15th of December 2021. I just want to highlight 4 very important points to my mind. Point number 1 is their a firm commitment to respect labor rights, and then the benchmarking were made against the ILO Declaration on Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work, as well as the UNGPS, which is a very authoritative document, persuasive and authoritative document for businesses to adhere to good labor practices. Yeah, and then they also emphasize on compliance to national law, which is very important, as well as the MSPOP-NC. As we know, it is mandatory now for the palm players. Yeah, and the final point is that this charter is complementary to the National Action Plan on Forced Labor. So at the sectorial level, we saw the sparking, the lights are coming out then, though it's slow, but I'm positive something good will come up. Let's move on to the next slide then. Yes, so now I think I will highlight what are the 4 initiatives, the initiatives by the businesses. Just looking at FGV, I think FGV has made a commitment of 43 million to refurbish the workers' housing. SIMDABI also made a financial commitment of 65 million ringgit to improve on the working conditions of its own plantation. Yeah, so these are efforts. Besides financial commitment, I hope the policy and the embedment of the policy will also be part and parcel of this initiative. Let's move on to the last slide. Yes. So, okay, for the rubber glove sectors, I just want to highlight these are the 2 initiatives. So maybe Supermax, interestingly, announced its new foreign worker management policy effective 2021. Raymond, can we move to the the next slide? Sorry, no, the other one. Yeah, no, go down. Another one. Yes, okay. So I just want to highlight what are the key points in this policy, which is effective from November 2021. So again, Supermax gave a full commitment to complying to international benchmarking, to modernizing human resources tools and system, to improve benefits, facilities and living conditions. And to my mind, the highlight for me is to adopt an equal pay policy and benefits for local and foreign workers. So this is the commitment made by Supermax, and it will definitely be subject to a lot of scrutiny and supervision by the global community. So yes, so let's move on to the slide before this, Raymond. Yes, on Top Gloves. Yeah, so these are, so Top Glove is the first rubber glove company that managed to overcome the accusation or the allegation against the 11 ILO indicators. And moving forward, Rubber Gloves has made a commitment, like what my Fairuz said, you know, you need to demonstrate, businesses need to demonstrate that they are committed to improve themselves for a certain duration of time. So in this case, Top Glove has made a commitment in 5 areas: on recruitment, improving workers' accommodation, improving working and wages for workers, health and safety aspect, and finally on the measures to safeguard their workforce post-COVID-19. I think handling of the pandemic is becoming very critical for, be it for the rubber gloves as well as the palm sector then. Okay, so I would like to move on to the next slide, Raymond. Yes. Okay, so another point that I would like to share with all of you, I think before the end of the year, I saw a more collaborative initiatives. But basically, these initiatives, if I'm not mistaken, is a project by the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office together with various government agencies, including MPOCC, MPOB, MACMAR. So what they have done is that they have tapped into the various specialties of the experts that are available within the academia from UK as well as within Malaysia, as well as from the industry. As you can see, Cargill also participated in this, as well as the auditor. So this is a platform for capacity building, and I think this month they will have a closure on this, and a physical meeting has been facilitated. So again, this is a collaborative initiative that is shaping within the national landscape. Yep. So this is the first step moving forward. And then finally, the final slide, Raymond, please. Finally, I also want to emphasize that at the grassroots level, we have this very important public forum. Me and Alima attended this, and we can see that a lot of the civil society has provided constructive recommendation and feedback on the government policy, primarily the National Action Plan on Forced Labour. My two take back points from this forum is that it seems that corruption is a systemic issue within the Malaysian society, and I think we need to address that moving forward. And then secondly, we also need to recognize that there is a limitation within the current audit system. And I didn't make that finding, but SEDEX recently released a report to talk about that, and therefore a new way of scrutinizing the presence or the existence of forced labor needs to be carried out by company. So with this, I've come to the closure of my presentation, and I wish to say that moving forward, I hope we can translate all these silo initiatives into a more consolidated integration in implementation to help our country as well as help our business maybe the focus on Malaysia, but previously many countries producing, like Turkmenistan, a cotton producing country, has been implicated. But with the support of international community and national initiatives, they have managed to overcome all these challenges. Thank you very much to everyone.
Thank you, Puan Surina, for a very comprehensive presentation and providing us the updates on the efforts by the government, the private sector, and other stakeholders in an effort to address this forced labor. Our next panelist is also very interesting, Encik Faisal Arif, who is a founder of Border Pass, an IT company, and previously, before that, he was, believe it or not, a fund manager, and with international and national management, fund management firms. And he is also human rights researcher, and we are very lucky because he just completed a 4-part analysis of Malaysian migrant workers policies, and he will go over his analysis, maybe give us some background of Malaysian history relying on migrant workers as a solution to labor shortages, and also policy proposals that are in his analysis. With that, Faisal, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Alima. Good morning, Dato' Dean, speakers, participants. My name is Faisal Arif. Thank you for inviting me to this forum. We had a bit of a little earthquake in KL. I hope everyone's okay. Things were shaking in my room, at least. Inside the chat, it looks like other people had the same experience. It's not the crazy pills I'm taking. So a bit of background, I wrote a series of policy research papers on migrant labor in Malaysia on behalf of a think tank called the Center. And what we did was we looked at about 140 years worth of Malaysian and Malayan migrant labor policy. So kick things off, I'd like to highlight 3 lessons from that very expansive history. First of all, our addiction to cheap migrant labor is nothing new. Many of us think of it as something that's only happened about the past 10, 20 years or so. But the truth is we've been addicted to cheap migrant labor for at least about 140 years. In fact, between the 1880s and the late 1930s, Malaya absorbed the highest number of migrants per native population in the world, more than the US or Australia during their respective gold rushes. Now, that's to the point where in 1931, the Federated Malay States had a Chinese majority, right? So we are a nation of immigrants, and it's pointless to pretend we're not and be all right-wing about immigration. So that's the first point. Second point is what works in terms of policy. So thanks to that very long history, we've tried everything under God's green earth in terms of policy to reduce our dependence on migrant labor. From G2G agreements, we've had one with India about 100 years ago, to mass expulsions, crackdowns, restrictive foreign labor laws from 1959 onwards, etc. But by far, the most effective method to reduce foreign workers in Malaysia is, number one, have an economic crisis or war. We had the Great Depression, World War II, Asian financial crisis, global pandemic, very marked decreases in our foreign labor population. Now World War III, apparently. So, and second, giving migrants nationality. And that's what Sir Gerald Templer did in 1952. He gave citizenship to 2.6 million non-Malays. And by far, these 2 things reduce migrant worker populations more effectively than any other measure that we have. And number 3, I'd just like to highlight that there are political consequences as well to us having a very large, migrant population. Now we've heard of, and we've heard already, a lot of the discourse will revolve around worker rights, making sure that they're paid on time, exactly what they were promised, humane working conditions, living conditions, make sure that we don't abuse maids, etc. Now the thing is, once migrant populations get organized, the next natural step is political awareness. So much so that the first political party in Malaya was a communist party in 1930 in response to Chinese laborers not getting paid their dues and rations due to the Great Depression. And it's just very marked that in 2013, the current president of UMNO told Indonesian reporters that half of Malaysia's cabinet is of Indonesian descent, right? So that's where things will eventually move if you have large populations of migrants. So I know that's all History Channel stuff to a lot of people, but if we ignore the lessons of history, we'll be condemned to repeat the same mistakes over and over again. So let's bring things to something more present day, right? In terms of reform. The first thing that we've been advocating a lot is having a zero indenture and zero wage deduction policy. So as you all know, many migrant workers in Malaysia arrive indentured to the tune of 20,000 ringgit, owing 20,000 ringgit of migration expenses to agents. And the interest rate is ridiculously high, sometimes at 7% per month. And a lot of these migrant workers do not understand compound interest. So after 5 years, their debt balloons to 1.1 million ringgit. Now, when you talk to a lot of people, they go like, okay, why is that our problem? It is our problem because if they cannot repay their debts, they will stay on illegally in Malaysia. And that has all kinds of knock-on impacts to Malaysia, right? So the solution is simple. Have a zero indenture, zero employer wage deduction policy. Make sure that employers pay all migration expenses. And we saw just now from Sue's presentation, that's exactly what a lot of companies have been forced to do. And if you average it out, the big compensation divide by the number of workers, you won't be surprised to see that the number is close to about 20,000 per worker there. So, we want to make sure, and this is the next point, that migrant workers have a mathematical prospect of creating savings while they're in the country, right? Now, look at a minimum wage. It used to be like 900 ringgit, or no, was it 1,200 ringgit? Now the calls to increase it to 1,500, but our poverty line is 2,208 ringgit, and it's much higher in KL if you want to survive, right? And the odds of creating any savings at all with such low wages is very, very low. This also depresses the wages of B40 Malaysians in Malaysia, right? It's a big myth that, Malaysians, we don't want to do 3D jobs. We do 3D jobs, just not here. We do it in Singapore, we do it in Australia, right? Now, when we couple that with the fact that something really low, like only 3% of EPF members in Malaysia are able to retire with 1,000 ringgit a month. I say a bit of wage growth is not a bad thing. So there's very big impacts in terms of paying migrant workers a very, very low wage, and not a living wage, which impacts Malaysians as well. Thirdly, have a sort of a tier, as it were, right, in terms of order of preference. You want to hire Malaysians first. That's a given, right? We have 100,000 unemployed, I think, right now. I haven't looked at the numbers for a while. But let's make sure that we get them jobs first, number one. Number two, we extend the visas, working visas of existing migrant workers in Malaysia second. Number three, we legalize formerly legal migrant workers third, because a lot of them became illegal not because of their own doing, because of inhumane treatment. And this is the big point. Fresh migrant labor should be last, right? And how do we structure that? We can do progressively higher levies to make sure that that order of preference is respected, right? Our levies, if you benchmark it against what Singaporeans charge per month, is ridiculously low. If you speak to a Singaporean employer, there is a very clear preference for Singaporeans first, because migrant labor is so expensive. That's the opposite in Malaysia, and that's why we're running into all kinds of problems. Now, legalizing the formerly legal migrant workers also has a very important effect, which is quantification. We have no idea how many undocumented workers there are in the country. And any policy that we put together or formulate without numbers is very, very difficult to measure its effectiveness, right? And we've tried a lot of different to figure it out, but estimates go as high as 4 or 5 million, which is a very, very big chunk of our labor and population as well. Fourth point: use economic forecasting instead of quotas and ratios to calculate foreign labor intakes. Right now, believe it or not, companies get foreign workers based on how many pigs, how many cows, how many acres of estate land, tables in restaurants they have. And that's used to calculate how many foreign workers they can apply for, right? There is no reference towards the economic cycle, for example. And why is this important is because we want to make sure that in boom times, we don't overhire, and in bad times, we don't then have to expel out. And that's exactly what happened last year, right? We expelled all our foreign workers, and then suddenly when the economy picks up again this year, everyone's crying out for labor shortages and whatnot, which is not a very sane and structured way to sort of calculate your intakes, right? Fifth, Sue just now mentioned corruption. I'll go for the jugular and say that we need to curtail executive powers. There's something called special approvals by the Ministry of Home Affairs, which bypass the usual migrant worker application system that goes through MOHR procedures, right? We had a PAC on kawalan terhadap pekerja asing in 2020. Very interesting revelations of people with bags of money going in, and then when the number of special approvals exceed the number of migrant workers coming in through the regular application method, I think we've got a very, very serious problem over there. And sixth point is to enforce migrant worker welfare laws, specifically as immigration laws. We have extensive laws on working conditions, living conditions, etc. But we seem to be very biased towards enforcing the immigration side of things, not understanding that by neglecting the welfare laws, that can have a very, very big impact on the immigration side of things, right? I think I'm going to wrap. Points to ponder just very, very quickly. Number one, whatever I'm proposing is inflationary. Right? Are you prepared to pay 5-6 ringgit for your teh tarik going forwards? Right? No policy is a free lunch or free teh tarik, as it were. We will see that, and we're already seeing that. In fact, a lot of prices are going up, and part of it is what we're seeing right now. Secondly, we are an aging nation. If you take a look at the Department of Statistics Malaysia's numbers over the past 10 years, or 20 years, in fact, our population growth rate used to be something like 1.6%, has dipped to all the way to about 1%. A lot of our population growth was driven by migrants. And since 2019, they've been leaving the country in droves. Why is this a problem? Because who's going to take care of us when we're older? You don't want a situation like in Japan, where the sales of baby diapers exceeds the sales of adult diapers, right? Then you have a very big labor issue over there. Automation, third point, a lot of people say it's a panacea, it will solve our problems. If we do this, we do that. Do take a look at some of the studies, I think done by KRI, if I'm not mistaken, where the jobs that are most vulnerable to automation are Malaysian jobs, right? So if we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater and say automate everything, and not just reduce our dependence on foreign workers, but then Malaysians will also be impacted by that. So be very measured and careful. Have a sort of long-term plan on how to transition there. And final point before I wrap up is that wage differentials are also shrinking. If you take a look at, I'll give a very simple example. What Indonesians are getting paid in palm oil plantations. A good, hardworking palm oil worker can get almost about 2,000 ringgit a month. If you benchmark that against what they're already earning in Indonesian palm oil place, it can go up to about 1,600, 1,700. Right, slightly lower, but when you think about like the fact that they don't get harassed by government officials, their kids can go to school just fine. They have their support system over there. A lot of them are more sort of inclined to return home and do the job there. So we are no longer the prettiest girl at the ball. A lot of other countries pay very competitive wages for migrant workers, and we have to make some very big adjustments. And it's not basically employers need to start getting used to getting lower profits, higher labor costs, and make sure that people get a humane wage, something that they can live on. So I think I've gone on for about 10 minutes. I'll hand over back to Halima. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Faisal. And Faisal's analysis and policy proposals are available, right?
Yeah, it's on center.my. It's scattered with a whole bunch of other papers in there. But if you have any questions, do reach out. I have a website, faisalarif.com. You can drop me a note over there.
Thank you. Very thoughtful and is excellent policy materials. Have you sent it to the Parliament for them to consider you?
They ignore me. I don't want to be too vocal because then I get the Black Maria parked outside my house and then I get bundled off to Putrajaya and never seen again, right? So I'll just keep it at that level.
Thank you. Thank you. A very comprehensive presentation. You trace the history to your common sense, seems to me, proposal to for consideration. So our next speaker would be Ms. Renuka Balasubramaniam, who is my colleague, and Ms. Renuka teaches industrial relations and employment law, and he joined the law faculty last year after some maybe decade, 20 years in private practice representing individuals and corporation, as well as working on pro bono basis representing victim of human trafficking and migrant workers. And Renuka is working on a dissertation dealing with smallholder protections, which is in the palm oil industry. She will be, I believe, actually I asked her to focus on the gap. Surina earlier has gave us an overview of the efforts to address forced labor. And I have asked Renuka to give us one specific gap in our effort to address forced labor, which is common knowledge, is access to grievances mechanism for victim of forced labor and human trafficking, forced labor. And she will explain to us that gap in the effort, and then she will also share with us before we go to Professor Ahmad regarding effort to modernize using a technology in resolving the problem of labor shortage. The floor is yours, Renuka.
Thank you, Dr. Halima, for that very kind introduction. I would just like to ask to be reminded when I have 2 minutes left. If somebody could do me that kindness, Raymond or Dr. Halima. Right. So the subject of my presentation today, most of which has been drawn from the study I conducted for the Bar Council together with 2 other researchers, Ms. Eleanor Taylor Nicholson and Ms. Natasha Mahindran, for the Bar Council. This study is available online. You can look it up. It's in full and it's free. And in that study, what we did was we reviewed several. No, I'm unable to move my screen for some reason. Here we are. Okay. So we reviewed several mechanisms available to migrant workers in the event they needed to redress rights violations. Right, so some of the mechanisms related to the Ministry of Human Resources, they were, for instance, the Department of Labor, the Industrial Relations Department, and the Industrial Court. There were also those situations when they were victims of crimes, and recourse was only to be had at the police station, right? So under the Labor Department, there were issues. There was the mechanism for inspections. In fact, in my previous slide, you can see photos, and that I lifted off the Department of Labor's website, photos of inspections at factories. And then there were also the wage and hour complaints. You know, so for instance, when workers are having their wages deducted, or when they're being made to work excessive hours. And then there's also the process for workmen's compensation in the event of accidents or disease. Under the Industrial Relations Department, there are provisions for collective bargaining, as well as, the Industrial Relations Department manages that, the process of forming a union and negotiating a collective agreement, as well as the process for claiming remedies for unfair dismissal. And then finally, we have the Department of Occupational Safety and Health, which has a system for prosecuting unsafe or unhealthy work conditions. Now, under the criminal justice system, we reviewed common crimes that migrant workers faced. Some of them were physical abuse, some of them were situations of theft, even theft of their passports, theft of their wages, and then, of course, with female migrant workers, issues of sexual abuse or harassment. A big part, a significant amount of time was also dedicated in the study to anti-trafficking measures and remedies for victims of trafficking. So I won't go into too much detail of that. The study is available online. It is a very helpful resource for those of you looking for the legal perspective of what actually happens in relation to these mechanisms. The study did not cover immigration, prosecutions, prisons, or conditions of detention, but very interestingly, one of the things that did come out from the study was the extent to which the recruitment process is flawed. As many of the previous speakers have shared, there are significant problems with executive authority. In fact, one of the cases that we highlighted in the study was of a former Director General of Immigration who had been prosecuted for taking kickbacks. And in his testimony in court, he details the process by which the minister has the authority and how the minister delegates it to him, and the rationale for his collecting kickbacks, as well as what that money is contributed to. So that was a pretty groundbreaking decision, because it is evidence of occasion of, let's say, collusion at that level in the process of managing recruitment. And as we know, recruitment and the costs involved with recruitment are one of the main indicators of forced labor. That's where remediation is most often being asked of employers. And also that happens to be one of the areas which employers have very little control over, because A, it happens in another jurisdiction, B, it concerns public policy in relation to recruitment, which is not transparent, and in relation to which there is no control. There is the formal process for recruitment, and then there's the informal process. So moving on, in short, some of the findings of the study were that migrant workers experience a range of problems relating to wage violations, petty crime, corruption, extortion, and then from both employers as well as outsourcing agents, state authorities, as well as from the public, third parties. They have a lack of information and material for seeking redress. And that the vast majority of people who experience work-related harms never make complaints. And also that most, as I highlighted earlier, that the recruitment procedures are influenced by immigration restrictions. So there were many reasons why they did not access justice. There was a fear of retaliation by employers. There was a fear of arrest and vulnerability to arrest. There was the lack of knowledge about where to go and what to do. And embassy assistance. There was a general assumption that, oh, if they have problems, they can go to the embassy. No, they can't. The embassy assistance was not consistent. And finally, the issue of passport retention. Many employers retain the passports of migrant workers purportedly for safekeeping. And without the passports, the workers were in extremely vulnerable situations. So, yeah, I won't go very much further into these problems. I think a lot of people present here are very familiar with the problems within our laws and our administrative processes. But one thing I want to highlight was a big takeaway from that study was that for the most part, the duty bearers and the rights holders were not being efficiently supported to promote their own rights and to fulfill their duties. Okay, the context itself did not facilitate that. So, for instance, in order for a migrant worker to be able to safely bring up his rights violations and seek remedies for his rights violations, he needed to have a context or an environment that promoted that. And that environment just wasn't there. Why wasn't it there? Most of these laws that we analyzed were established, the basic structure of most of these laws were established at a time when trade unions were strong, when there was a very strong environment for managing labor violations. Now, since the fall of the Iron Curtain, if you like, since privatization worldwide in many organizations, this trade union movements have weakened, and workers don't have the backing, the collective backing, to be able to access the rights. So the legal system, which was created with the idea that there would be unions assisting workers, is now carrying on without the backing of those kinds of, without trade union backing. And so individual workers are left to fend for themselves, as it were. And in addition, there is a need for strong administrative support from the necessary agencies, government agencies, which I highlighted earlier, and that too is lacking. So in this way, the cycle of trade, harms, and human rights violations is perpetuated. It continues. So we can, if you can look at to the right of my diagram here, we've got harms to workers, and then we've got government inaction that has led to poor access to justice. We get forced labor, and still trade requires that labor is necessary. And in the process of that, seeking migrant labor to support trade, harms to workers arises again. So this cycle has just been continuing. And as Faisal pointed out earlier, this is not a new problem. right from pre-independence dates, when our economy was dependent on agriculture, trade was brought in, workers were brought in to support that economy. And it was entirely dependent, it was entirely at the behest of the corporations. So what are some potential solutions aside from law reform? And the reason I've said aside from law reform is because, as I highlighted earlier, the solution does not appear to be in better, stronger laws. The solution is very much political. In fact, if you look at the recruitment section of our study, you'll see how it is a political problem in the end. So one solution that was recommended by the Department of Labor, the US Department of Labor, is their social compliance system, where through iLab, a system called Comply Chain was established. And you can find this, it's free and available online. It's an app that they've developed by which employers and stakeholders are encouraged to set up the system within their workplaces, a system by which workers are able to raise their concerns, and employers and other stakeholders are able to develop a code of practice and train the people necessary in order to be able to respect and promote migrant workers' rights. So that's one system that is being promoted by the Department of Labor. And having reviewed it, what I can see from it is it's very worker collective strong. And therefore, the days of employers keeping unions out, if you wish to pursue the social compliance system, those days are over. These types of systems only work efficiently if there is some form of worker collective within the organization, because nobody other than the workers will be able to raise concerns in a manner that is efficient. And it doesn't just highlight the issue of setting up a system. There is also a need to monitor compliance and remediate violations. And finally, there is the question of independent review. I noticed from the presentation on CPP, where Fairuz highlighted the need for independent third-party reviews. It's still, I think the jury's still out on whether reviews by a trade union or a worker collective within the organization would count as independent reviews. Because if those worker collectives were trained sufficiently to perform these reviews, would that not count as the most solid form of audit? So here I've provided the name of the app, as well as its authors, the US Department of Labor and the Bureau of International Labor Affairs. And then the other solution, the other potential solution is tech. The next speaker will be talking a little bit more about tech, but one of the companies which we at UM have been working with is Cambion. And I have a brief video here to show you their solution for the way forward as far as these issues of labor shortage are concerned. And why I'm highlighting this is because if we look back, say 15 years ago or 20 years ago, the idea of working with the internet might have been, too futuristic. 30 years ago, we would never have thought that we would be using the internet and that snail mail would go out of fashion. And today, there is no company that doesn't work with the internet. Now, AI is like that for us now. AI is a thing in the future, and artificial intelligence is something that in the next 15, maybe even right away, is just going to be the way of doing business. Now, Faisal talked earlier a lot about providing jobs for locals. And in my study of, the local labor economics locally, I'm finding that tech is a way by which we can provide jobs for Malaysians, and we can upgrade our businesses to the extent that we don't need to be so reliant on migrant labor. So please enjoy this brief presentation. So in short, what they're doing is they're training Malaysians to be drone pilot operators. And with the use of drones, they expect to be able to not only harvest, but fertilize and collect the data analytics needed for managing the plantations. Now, this is highly skilled work. This is what Industry 4.0 is all about. I will allow, I think I'll end my presentation there, and I turn it back to you, Dr. Alima.
Thank you, Renika, for your presentation. Our last speaker will be Dr. Ahmad Ibrahim, who is a veteran for the palm oil industry. Professor Dr. Ahmad is a professor of chemical engineering at UCSI University, and also a senior fellow at the Academy of Science, Malaysia, and part of the network, Fraunhofer Research Network. So I remember coming across the Professor Ahmad's name in a letter he wrote regarding making the palm oil, working for the palm oil industry is cool for the millennium. And I thought that's a great way to do it, especially if we develop the technology to modernize the industry. With that, I invite Professor to share with us what is the recent development in our effort to cure Malaysia from addiction to cheap forced labor, which are not cheap anymore, with all this penalty they have to pay, regarding challenges you see in developing the technology for mechanization of the industry.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Alima. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to learn about the issue of labor, which has happened in recent years. But to me, the reality is the business will have to face a lot more competition in the marketplace. And also there is a greater concern over two major things. One is environment. The other one is labor management. And this has become policies adopted by many countries. And the idea is to push the world to embrace such concerns. And the way they do it is they can have international standards on environment, which is transparent to all in facilitating trade. But they can also have a unilateral standard of their own and impose on trade. So I see this as a mix of things happening. The palm oil industry has been facing a lot of these obstacles in the business, in the trade over the years. Started with nutrition and then environment and now labor. And this is not going to stop because the world is increasingly concerned about environment, climate change, and also the way that labor is treated. To me, actually, migrant workers is not the issue. The way we treat migrant workers is the issue. Because there's no way this migrant labor will go away. All countries will be short of labor. We can see in the West, the developed nation, they also depend a lot on migrant labor. But the system of engaging, of recruiting, of managing, of treating this labor is very important because there is increasing concern in the world about poor treatment of labor, not just migrant labor, even local labor, there is a poor treatment. So now, and I would say that this global, the addiction to cheap labor is a global problem because you can see all the multinational companies, the way they shift their operation to where the labor is cheapest. And Malaysia, we have seen the influx of electronic companies in the past, but now our labor cost has gone up, they've moved out. So it is not a Malaysian or any regional problem, it's a global problem. And countries, one of the ways they get businesses to conform to the new requirement is by using the non-tariff barriers to trade. Because the tariff barriers is on the way out because of WTO and all this. So now many resort to non-tariff barriers. So they erect all kind of barriers like what is happening based on labor or based on environment. So the conclusion from that is that we have to face this reality. The business has to come to terms with this reality. And one of the solutions that we have to think about is, of course, using technology. And as mentioned by Renuka, technology, the internet technology, and all this AI is now becoming more and more real in the world. And if we, the businesses, are not investing in this technology, we may find that we will be behind. And the other thing is that in Malaysia, we have always talked about all this high income economy, but our dependence on low cost labor is still rampant. We're not moving into the technology enhanced business. We're not investing enough in technology. And the other thing I want to mention is that in order to really embrace technology, there is to be a lot of collaboration. Not only collaboration among parties in the country, but collaboration internationally. And this is something which I see is lacking in the country. And with this kind of disturbance coming from the market, I think it's time we rethink our strategy for going on the high technology ladder. And I would like to suggest, I think we all know what are the technologies. In fact, there are some companies who are quite proactive in pursuing as mentioned, Renuka has mentioned one. I know a few more, and they've, through their own initiative, they've gone into trying to digitalize the plantation sector using AI and all this. And but I feel if we as a country, we can further organize the way that we develop or invest in technology, I think we can go there faster. Now, my suggestion is, I would like to suggest that this technology area for plantation, on mechanization, on automation, should not just be done in silos, should not be done just by companies or MPOB. I would like to suggest an R&D alliance in the country, which bring in universities, bring in the companies, bring in MPOB and all the players as an alliance. And the country will have to create the necessary topics, and especially for applied research. I'm talking about applied research, not the fundamental research. So through this alliance, and this alliance can also collaborate with international partners to try and develop technology. We have to leapfrog. We cannot just be, just hoping that our local can develop these technologies. So we have to collaborate internationally, locally, different parties. And in this way, I think we can do it faster in terms of getting the plantation companies, and not just plantation, even some other SME groups. We must create alliance of all this research instead of each research organization operating in silos. This is what's happening, and it's very sad because the government spend billions on research, and they always crying that this research is not reaching industry, this research cannot be applied in industry, because there is no connection. There is no connection between the users of technology and the producers of technology. So I think for this dependent on low-cost labor, we have to slowly wean ourselves away from this. Because as you know, in developed economies, they have embraced all kinds of technologies to improve productivity and to be less dependent on manual labor. And I think we can do it, but we need to invest, and we need to invest on the long term. We cannot be investing for 2 years, then we stop. And this is what is happening. This IR 4.0, this is a big blueprint that the government has produced, one in MITI, one in MOSTI, but the funding to support IR 4.0 is not there. And the funding comes abruptly, and it can be interrupted halfway. This is not the way we develop, we embrace technology. And closer to home, Singapore is a big difference from Malaysia in terms of pursuing technology development. So the solutions are mixed. We have to come out with the system to, as mentioned by earlier speakers, to manage whatever labor that we bring in from other countries, because this dependent on migrant labor is not going to go away. All countries depend on migrant labor, but how you manage this migrant labor is under a lot of scrutiny by various countries, and they can erect barriers to trade if they find that we are faulting on the way we treat labor. I will end there, Dr. Halimah, and hope to have some discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor, for your presentation. And before, let's open this to questions and any comment. Renuka, is there anything that, I'm looking at the chat box.
Yes, I have taken a few questions out and put it on a screen, but if I can just sort of pitch the first question that was put forward. So somebody asked, I believe one of the, either Serena or Fairuz can try to answer this question. Derek Feynman asks, is the hearing, and I assume that's the CBP hearing he's referring to, is this is there a hearing given, or is it all behind the scenes? Is the determination based on written reports and claims? Would any of the panelists like to take that question? So this is in relation to the assessment by the CBP as to whether adequate proof has been provided of having produced forced labor.
Fairuz has been talking to media with the process.
Okay, sorry. Okay, regarding that, the question, actually answer in exactly what happened, because is the one that been constant, because everyone actually not that clear. Even the recent the latest update being provided by the CBP, it doesn't mention if there is any hearing, because it is totally different from one case to another. So what happened, for example, the explanation of the WRP, for example, when they received the documentation, I think it was during the pandemic, COVID. So all it just through the I believe it's through online, whatever they're providing, and they submit the document, and then they're able to prove. Then the WRO been lifted or been modified. So to answer your question, there is not so far I didn't see any hearing as far as the my knowledge is no, because I keep also asking the CBP to clarify if the company like FGV or the Sandaibi, how they communicate with the CBP. Usually they ask their legal counsel to the communicating with this CBP. So this is what happened now. But I think recent webinar, I think from organized by the CBP with the reporters or media in Malaysia, they welcome if the concerned parties to contact directly with them to provide any document or relevant information that related to that particular incident or WRO. Yeah, that's all.
Well, can I say something from my own reading of the regulations? The standard, so anyone can file a complaint regarding allegation of forced labor. There's certain format, but the standard, there is no hearing, but rather informal. The standard is not conclusive, is reasonable from the point of view of the commissioner. Reasonably, it's a very vague standard. This is administrative proceeding, informal somewhat, because this regulation has not been tested in court, challenged. There's a lot of it's not clear because it has not been tested in court and clarified what exactly, but basically the language suggests it's not conclusive. Allegation in the petitions, as long as in the mind of the commissioner is reasonable, probably that's enough for the commissioner to issue WRO. And again, there is no transparency here. And this is a new regulation, has not been challenged, and enforcement fairly recent. So again, as Fairuz mentioned, there is no communication between CBP and stakeholders, even within the US agencies. So with that, the standard is, to me, at least based on the plain reading and what happened, is very vague and subject to abuse and arbitrary, which is very difficult to prove. So that is my reading of the regulation.
Thank you, Dr. Alima. So some other questions that I think this next question, I think I can sort of take, and I would like to invite any of the other panelists also to jump in if you feel that you have something to say on it. So our industry is aware of what constitutes forced labor and what is the standard of forced labor that is being used. Are there employers working with local CSOs to address this long-standing issue? So what's clear from one of the earlier presentations, I think Fairoz shared how they are looking at the ILO forced labor indicators. And what are these ILO forced labor indicators? It's very clear from here. You can see that some of these forced labor indicators employers are able to address, and others government will need to address. And so if, depending on who you are, if you're an employer, then perhaps it's important that you look at issues such as unlawful deductions to wages. Yes, many employers have this system of, collecting on behalf of labor contractors, deducting from the worker's salary on behalf of labor contractors. And so while the worker thinks he's going to get 1,500, he ends up getting 900 because deductions were made for various expenses. So unlawful deductions, and the Employment Act provides for what is and isn't an unlawful deduction, regardless of what your contract says. The provision of the law supersedes. That's provided in the Employment Act, and all migrant workers, primarily because they are manual workers, will fall under that category. Sorry about that noise. And then the second thing is in relation to housing and living conditions. And the third thing we find has to do with abuse. This question of physical abuse by labor contractors and other third parties is a serious and rampant problem because of the fact that there is no redress and there's such a fear for retaliation by the employer or because of such a fear of losing one's job. When workers are physically or sexually even abused, there is no remedy for that. And so serious measures need to be put in place, protecting workers who want to complain about abuse, as well as remediating those problems. Those are some things employers can do. And then contract substitution is another forced labor indicator. They sign one contract in the home country, they arrive here and they are given completely different terms. So these are some of the issues that employers have the power to address. And addressing them right from the get-go now can prevent future concerns of being accused of having forced labor indicators. Anybody else want to jump in on these questions?
If I may, Renuka? Yeah, I just want to echo what Renuka has just mentioned. I think addressing forced labor challenges should start from recruitment, because recruitment is the entry point. And if you see, if you look at all the forced labor indicators, they are all interrelated actually, but the starting point is on recruitment. And in addressing recruitment challenges, it can't be a silo initiative by the employer per se, but it has to be a collaboration, because the employer oftentimes, I know the practice in the sector is that I subcon this to you, you are my recruitment agency, you get the worker for me and I will just place them in my workforce. So we know that there is an interface between the employer recruitment agency as well as other government agencies, be it in the country of origin where the workers come from, as well as in the country of destination where they are working. So the points that we're all discussing today, they're all interrelated, and until and unless there is a collaborative effort linking all the players within the supply chain, we can't be talking about having an effective mechanism to address the risk to forced labor. We're talking about a risk to forced labor, yeah? So these are my additional points. And then with regards to the level of awareness on the 11 ILO indicators, I think from my personal experience, I can see the level of awareness is very low. For instance, when we talk about retention of critical ID of migrant worker, oftentimes if you go on the ground, there will be sharing about, hey, we keep the documents because we need to renew. It will facilitate the renewal process. Whereas under the within the discussion of forced labor risk, we need to allow them to keep because if that is they have got the right over their own ID, and that would give them a freedom to move away, so they are not constrained and being sort of forced to work with the same employer. So that is another aspect. And then the last point I would like to talk about would be on the social dialogue between the employer and the employee, which is very much lacking because currently the employment, the provision of migrant workers is oftentimes facilitated by intermediaries. And this is another layer of discussion that we need to address effectively.
If I may just pitch in something, if we have time, I'm a bit cynical about a lot of these sanctions because to me, just looking at it from a sort of eagle-eyed sort of like perspective, bird's eye view perspective, I think what the Americans really care about is protectionism, and the Europeans as well. American soybean, corn, European rapeseed. I think that's what they're really concerned about. I'll sound horrible in saying this, but I don't think it's altogether altruistic or humanitarian of them. They tried to get us on the environmental point before. Now they can't. That's not really working, so they move on to the labor side of things. Now that said, I think we should have reforms in the country, even if their intentions are sort of a little under the table, sort of like not quite clear over there. But we should change, not because they are telling us that we should do this or that. We should do things because, look, as a society in Malaysia, what sort of like country do we want to have? How do we treat people fundamentally, right? Set standards on our own that are much higher than anything else. Other people would point at us and say, we should live up to, right? So I don't want it to be like, oh, we'll only make a response if there are sanctions on us. I don't think that's the right approach. I think we should really sit down and say, okay, we are Malaysia, we are Malaysians. This is how Malaysians treat migrant workers, and we have a very high standard already there, and something from within rather than from without. So end of rant.
Thank you, Faisal. Exactly. We discussed this issue the last year panel where when we had a panel discussing the political and trade issues dimension of this sanction. You're right, and the last panel we talked this issue of forced labor, reminiscence of the anti-tropical oil back in the 80s, where coconut and palm oil were, there's a lot of allegation about these oils were bad for health, and it's the same thing. And I think Professor Ahmad probably remember that issue. It's true, yes. The hypocrisy, and you are right that we do it not because, well, now we are sanctioned. This allegation has been there in the US government reports the last 10 years. The government did nothing, still not doing anything. So now they're still not doing anything. And I don't know what they're doing to help the companies. And even for the petition, at least the government should submit a kind of information to help the companies about what they are doing to address this. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Anybody else?
Yeah, Dr. Alima. Yes, I totally agree with what Faisal has mentioned. The root of all this is competition, but we must not allow avenues for competitors to use issues to create barriers to trade. So this is what is happening. Competition is a real issue, but we should be aware of international standards, for example. I don't think we invest a lot in going to the where these international standards on labor and environment are drafted. We don't go to, we're not investing in those. And I have been going to some of the meetings on environment, TC 207 and the ISO, and I see that from the developed countries, the companies are also going to these meetings to make sure that the standards that are formulated will not go against their business interests. So, but we're not. And the other thing is awareness. I agree that there is very low awareness of the ILO standards in the country. But what do we do about that? Who goes to the standards? What do they do when they come back? Do they create a program to create awareness among the businesses? So I think we have to get real, as Faisal mentioned. We should actually be proactive in addressing this because they will become, and they're coming in more ways in the future. So if Malaysia as a trading nation, if we ignore this kind of development, then we are in deep trouble. Thank you.
If I may add just one point to what the panelists has said, don't forget that we also have our set of laws, you know, even though they may be a little bit outdated, nonetheless, like for the people in the business sector, they can always adhere to a higher standards, which is the ILO objective anyway, because with regards to ILO conventions, the state need to ratify those conventions as far as Malaysia being a dualist country. But nonetheless, at the business front, in the event that X company decided to use a higher standard, I am free to do so if you are RSPO member and even in the business sector. So you will have a better comparative advantage to demonstrate that your company is adhering to a higher standard. Yeah. So another last point would be on the implementation and enforcement of our local laws, which is very much lacking. And if you talk to the labor officers and JTK, and I think if you read the TIPS report, one of, I think it's 2020, you will realize that even the authorities, the American authorities realize that many of our enforcers are not aware of what are these international expectations, you know, expected from them. Thank you very much.
Dr. Alima, I'm mindful of the time.
Yeah.
I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, any more questions? What do you see in the inbox, Renuka? Any more questions?
This is the last that I curated, the one I'm sharing on the screen.
Right.
That was the last one I found.
Okay, so then we are finished with the questions, and I want to thank our panelists who shared with us their perspective. As what we covered today, we beginning with Fairuz, who explained his interaction with DOL and CBP, and how we can work together with the US authorities to fix the system to the extent the allegations are credible. I have no idea. There's no analysis, and it's not clear to me also whether the Malaysian nations are being scapegoats for this enforcement. The sanctions, the WROs are extremely broad and very fast, and we just, there's no pushback. I don't know how the company is dealing with these issues. Nonetheless, the allegations are there, and we are to discuss from the policy perspective what should be done. And Faisal look at the migrant workers policy and require reform, and it's very useful analysis and proposal as policy materials for the government, and to help us with this overview what the efforts have been taken to address this issue in response. And Renuka highlight this very gap, what is lacking, access to things for them to have a meaningful remedy. And then, of course, Professor Ahmad, who update us the status of the technology to address as an option for foreign workers. And certainly what you said was correct. There's no investment, and there's no way Malaysia can afford to commercialize the research without international collaboration. And we have more resources in the industry and as well as the technology. So with that, I want to thank everyone. You have contact information of the panelists. If you have further, questions, I'm sure they are happy to address any question you may have subsequently. And also, I hope the students or scholars who are attending this, who are working in the area of business and human rights, migrant workers, sanctions. Now, you meet one another here, and perhaps there will be collaboration to commercialize the drone technology that Renuka brought to our attention. So with that, thank you all for coming, and thank you for spending time with us. And stay in touch and stay safe.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alima and esteemed speakers. May we request for everybody in the room to turn on their camera? The faculty would like to take a few screenshots. Yeah, a few screenshots to just
I think they've run
document.
off.
Oh, and that's all. I think a lot of people have left already.
Yeah, they ran off.
Yeah.
Dah penat lah.
Okay.
Thank you, Rahman.
Thank you, Dr. Alima. Thank you again, esteemed speakers, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of UMCoRS and the Faculty of Law, thank you very much for making our event a success. We thank you all for attending. As you leave the meeting, there will be a survey questionnaire that will pop up in your browser. Please do respond to it. We would really appreciate some feedback. Thank you once again. Have a good day, and we hope to see you again in our future webinars.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Have a
Thank
good
you.
weekend, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.